Welcome, sentient beings from all known universes and beyond. It's time to activate your cranial downlinks and prepare to receive a raft of discussion on a cosmic ocean of science fiction and fantasy topics, interviews with local area genre devotees, and insightful prognostication by our soothsayers of science fiction, our forecasters of fantasy, and any other beings that happen to get caught in our gravity well. This is the Galactic Driftwood Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Galactic Driftwood Podcast. I'm Bill.
I'm Linda.
I'm Seth.
I'm Jenna.
Chris.
And Stu, we're almost at the point where you can just introduce yourself like a regular host. You're on so much anymore. So anyway, Stu Burns is joining us again. And this episode, we're going to be talking about the show Elves. It's a series. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes. I have not yet seen it, but Stu, being our foremost mythology expert on the show, has done a little bit of research into elves, and we're going to see how that compares maybe to the series. And we might also touch a little bit on Krampus in case some of our listeners out there haven't heard our previous shows on Krampus. We'll talk about him as well. So, Jenna, why don't you kick us off today and tell us what is the idea behind Elves? What's this kind of the plot line? What happens, kind of a thing?
So just to sum it up, Elves is a Danish movie. I'm assuming it's Danish because it is supposed to be a small island outside of Copenhagen or Denmark, something.
Yes.
I mean, and it's a pretty easy series to get through because it's only 6 episodes and each episode is like 25 to 30 minutes when you take away the credits.
I'm going to argue with you. It's kind of hard to get through.
It's not that tough to get through, bro. It's
it's a pretty easy glide, but so a family who is just trying to reconnect over Christmas heard from a coworker that, hey, I've got a cabin out on this island that nobody's at. So if you're trying to just get away and enjoy a really family-centric Christmas, here you go. So they rent this cabin on the island, and you start to get the impression pretty quickly that they're not used to outsiders. And they're just like, okay, so just as you're staying here, note that this is a preserve. You stay on the coastal road. And, we don't like cutting down trees, and enjoy your Christmas. And the family is an interesting dynamic because you have the daughter who's probably on the cusp of turning into a teenager, who's trying to prove to her mother that she is a mature enough, adult enough kid to have a dog. And it sounds like her mom still babies her, abused her as a little girl. And then there's the older brother who's kind of a jerk to her all the time, doing the big brotherly thing, teenager. And then there's the father who's trying to be the cool dad, and but the mother's obviously a corporate worker type. So you have this family dynamic where the daughter tries to tell them stuff or talk to them about things, and she always gets shut down. And really what I came away with a major theme of this whole series was, this is why you buy your kid a dog, so that they don't attract supernatural entities or try to befriend them when those entities potentially want to eat your face.
That sounds like a logical way to proceed. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
So that's basically the series in a nutshell, because the family on their way, because they didn't stay on the coast, Daddy thought it'd be cool to take a shorter route through the woods. They hit something, and she thinks she sees it, and she's like, we hit something. I'm like, no, we didn't, because it's like a black spot on the car, that looks like a chemical to them versus blood color. So she sneaks out that night and brings back a baby elf that she doesn't know is a baby elf, and nurses it back to health. And unfortunately, chaos and death ensues.
All right. So are these, these are dark elves then, right?
That is definitely what's going on. And probably just go ahead and spoiler alert. Definitely recommend this as a unique movie series, but as we go into talk more about it, probably spoiler alert our audience.
It's hard to tell. It almost looked like she was holding Groot in that picture.
He looks a lot like Groot. That's a
true.
very close analogy. Yes.
They probably did that on purpose, I'm thinking, right? Help attract more people to watch it.
So it's just one of those, at first it's cute and then it's all scary like Gremlins kind of thing going on.
The adults are scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's cool. It's a cool take on elf and dark elf because you get the folklore is that people like living on this island because it's quiet, it's peaceful, and easygoing. And the price they pay is that they have to sacrifice a cow every once in a while to keep the elves behind the fence happy. Because they tried to start logging like 15 years ago on the island. A company came in, bought something, started logging, and basically you don't get huge details. There was a massacre because the elves did not like their shit being cut down.
Okay.
So do the elves have any magical powers in the show?
No.
Or
They're just gruesome.
Evil.
They just seem to be. There just seem to be a lot of them, and they're kind of fast and kind of creepy.
Like they're more like an animal, a natural just animal. They move in packs. They can understand you, but they just kind of. It's almost like chimpanzees. Would you say, Stu?
Oh yeah, almost really like Sasquatch actually in some ways. More the hairy wild creature that lives out in the wilderness that's like us, that perhaps the infant. I never quite got the sense of, do the elves actually understand Danish or not?
Yeah.
Because she tries to teach the elf her name, and the elf is able to say her name, and she has a name for the elf.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure they're actually communicating. I'm not sure. It's very ambiguous. Well, most of the series is really that ambiguous, honestly.
I think just one random photo of the elves from this movie, and that's how you start out the Legend of Big Ears.
Nah. I don't want to talk about it.
So with at any point, so we see how kind of cute some of those pictures look. Do their eyes always look like they're innocent, or are there times where no, they don't? So
they just baby Yoda up the baby.
Yeah,
okay.
I think because when they grow up, it's a lot of teeth and narrow eyes, and you can tell they're meant to be camouflaged because they look like they're just roots in the ground when they're down in the ground.
Well, they kind of move like that too.
They make a lot of noise. Like Aaron made the comment last night because we finished it last night. At least they're so loud when they move, the crinkling, because they have a lot of wood and bark camouflage naturally that seems to grow out of them. So when they move, it crunches like a broken branch.
So they can't really sneak up on you.
No.
Okay.
Well, except they kind of can, because you can't really see them coming. They're that well camouflaged.
I guess that makes sense. You hear something, but you're not sure what it is.
Yeah.
Right? And you'll see the movement. That's how they depict their movement through most of the series. Is you'll see their movement through the grass, but you don't actually see the elves themselves until they're right on top of you.
So you hear something, but you fail your perception check when you.
Yeah.
When you can see them moving close up, it's kind of herky jerky, like they're almost like they're breaking wood
just to
as
move.
they move, like they solidify if they remain stationary for too long. So that cracking sound they make is just kind of like, I don't know.
I almost get the impression that they're moving because they're keeping their head low. So the more woody part sticks out. So they're trying to move in a way that their prey wouldn't notice. So they can creep closer and hopefully you're not noticing versus just being above the ground and coming right at you quickly. They're trying to get closer so that they can take you out.
So is that the forest where they live? That picture
Yes,
we
because
just-
after the logging accident, the grandmother of a local girl that the teenage brother starts to crush on because lack of options. She basically locked down the island, and the people look to her to keep the elves happy because everyone on the island knows about them. You keep them
Okay,
happy.
so all the locals, this isn't new to them.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
So, and they put up this fence. They give them their things so they stay happy behind the fence, their cows or whatever. But because this little girl got this elf and took it back to her house instead of putting it on the end back on the inside of the fence, it pisses them off. They're like, one of you has one of us. And so when a guy goes in to give another cow to them, he doesn't come back out.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then that's kind of like she keeps making terrible decisions that end up killing people. Kind of like Carl in The Walking Dead. You kind of want to be like, shut up, Carl.
See, this is why I said it was really hard to watch, because that little girl was just pissing me off through the whole series. And I was like, I'm going to be really mad if she makes it through this alive.
And
She was. I mean, and it's so, I found it just so ambiguous because, you know, the child elf is this very innocent creature, and you have the sense that, you know, we could just communicate with the elves, you know, we could get along, we could figure it out. But then when the little girl hasn't, you know, and whenever you have an encounter with the elf, they're absolutely fearsome creatures. They're these terrible, you know, hungry predators they'll just rip you apart. And it really goes back, and it goes back and forth. Or should we sympathize with the elves, or are they entirely malevolent when they get older, or not? And or have we screwed up is it possible we just screwed up our relationship with nature so much that now the elves are just that upset with us that that's all that's left to them?
right.
I'm not sure what the theme of it's very difficult for me to suss out the theme of the program. I mean, because she really does, the little girl who annoyed Seth so much, she really does develop a rapport with this child elf. And then when the mother finds this girl, this child elf, she immediately starts throwing any projectiles she can get her hands on at the baby elf. Which is, I mean, just like the ultimate. I mean, filmically, we've been trained to see that as just a dumb move. You know, but then towards the end, they're like, no, she's one who really loves you. She's one who'll protect you, and you really go back and forth. Like, I'm not sure what this story is trying to communicate to me here.
That's where it seems like you're given this history, but you never get a chance to see it. There was a time there was no fence. The people lived on the island with the elves, and obviously things were good. So I'm thinking, Stu, like you said, there was a balance. There was maybe they're not talking, they're not collaborating and having like winter socials, but there was a peaceful coexistence. And then when they started logging, they just were done with you. That's kind of how the elves seem to perceive the humans.
Yeah.
So what I don't understand then is, you know, they went in to do the logging. The elves attacked the loggers in some fashion.
Which were all made up of local people who knew about it and went in because there was a promise of money by this outside company.
Well, that was dumb.
So, but
typical.
what I don't understand is why nobody called like the authorities to have the military come in and clear out the elves.
Because they're seen as a sacred thing. The leader of the island was like, we told you not to do this. People went in there, like her own daughter and son-in-law died in that massacre. But the grandmother is like, shouldn't have done it. We have to keep this place sacred. They never resort to bringing in the outsiders. They fix it themselves, is what they say.
So really, it's the elves probably around that time. The only reason humans were allowed with them is because they basically allowed it. The relationship was good.
Yes.
As it deteriorated, it became like, we'll let you stay as long as you keep following the rules, if you will. You know, whether it's a sacrifice or whatever.
Yeah, well, they contained the elves, like in the forest.
Yeah, they did and they didn't, because this fence is electrified. So that's the only thing that's really
okay.
is electrified fence. What is ambiguous, at least with some commentators I've seen, is that it appears that elves can burrow, and we know that at least the gate doesn't go underground. So what the heck is keeping these elves in the fence if they can burrow? And there's a lot of ambiguity, about is this really a reaction to things being out of sync with nature, or are these things just, or are elves more like bears, or they're just eternally ticked off and you have to keep placating them?
And is there any special thing you have to do to kill them, or is there any way of warding them off?
No, they're very killable.
Okay.
In fact, one character kills one by accident, which I won't go into, because that's certainly something of a spoiler. I'll speak to the ambiguity, because that actually, and I'm not sure this is intentional by the creators or not, but that really does speak to the folklore around elves, or folk belief, or even medieval belief, really, because I'm not sure if you even call it folklore, because it's so institutionalized. And in the Middle Ages, a lot of elves are really, I was really surprised how similar elves are to vampires in this way. The elves are something you blame diseases on. In medieval medical texts, you'll have these conditions where they'll say, well, he's elf shot, meaning he's been cursed by this elf. This elf he's irritated this elf somehow, and this elf has made him sick. Or even more like vampires, it's elf sucking, where he has like anemia or tuberculosis. It's like a wasting disease. It's like, well, it's because this elf is drawing on him. And it's a much more, people don't see the elves or anything like that. That's just there. Which in vampire folklore, that's very similar. You rarely see the vampire when people actually believe in vampires. It's more of a mystical association that the elves are somehow causing this. So it's this very baleful, explicitly in the medical text, there's this very baleful presence, but at the same time, you have a linguistic sense that there is a certain kinship with these spirits also. Indeed, I couldn't help but think of Batman with this. Alfred literally means elf counselor.
Really?
People would name their. There are lots of old English names. Alfred is the one that I think survives most of the present day, but there are a lot of English names that start with elf. And it's very much an homage to this spirit that we have some sort of relationship with.
So is that a name you'd give your kid, or a name you'd give yourself to come into a new community and be like, I'm Alfred?
As it was communicated to me, it was a name that you would give your kid. It was a blessing you'd give your child, that you this is my child is one who can communicate, who is like an elf counselor, who is like,
we're in a high elf traffic area. Let's make sure that the baby is on good terms from the get-go.
Well, and there's a lot of that, really. You're talking about, are these light or dark elves? I was looking, the other, that's what I'm talking about now is a little more of a British tradition or Saxon tradition. The more traditionally Nordic tradition, I almost have to define the Nordic tradition as the prose Edda and the poetic Edda, because that's our oldest text that we have, even though that's by that point is very Christianized and so forth. But in the prose and poetic Edda, in the prose Edda, it's explicit that the elves that live above ground are these pure, virtuous light elves, and the dark elves are the ones that live underground, and they're nasty.
Yeah, the Alfar and the Yoselfar,
something like that. Depending on which language you're talking about, because there are dozens of terms that eventually translate back to elf. Eventually, I was surprised that you're familiar. You're all D&D players with the drow. Yeah, that's explicit. That's right out of Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda.
It's Svartalfs, I believe.
Dark elves, yeah.
Yeah, good. Like there's Alfheim and Svartalfheim, two of the 9 realms.
Yep, and Alfheim is up above, and the The dark elves, they live below the earth. They're down underneath. Yeah, they're subterranean creatures. And this, in the Nordic tradition, this is not a dead thing. You're talking about, hey, this is a high elf area. We better be on good terms with the elves. That's not entirely a dead tradition. I always heard this word translated as fairies, but then I looked into the linguistics, and it's actually elves we're dealing with. Are you guys familiar with the situation of road building in Iceland?
Yes, that's why I just sent an article over.
Oh, you did you? All right, yeah. In the 1930s, there was this road being built, and well, at least according to the local newspaper reports, they kept having all kinds of troubles. Their tools would go missing. The things would break down, and traditionally, as elves become more benevolent in the British and Germanic traditions, that's really more the level of pranks they play. They become a lot less deadly as time goes on.
So, but I think that depends. That might be more of the pop culture, but the villages who live in these traditionally high areas, because I knew a businessman who made a lot of trips to Iceland and had friends out there, and he visited the home of one of his associates who lived there, and she was from Iceland, and it's at the edge of these woods. And he's like, it's a bright, beautiful night. The Aurora Borealis is out. Let's go for a walk. And she is like, hell no. You see those woods down there? There are trolls down there. Mm-hmm. We don't cross a line.
We don't mess with it. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, by the 1930s, they were building this, basically the interstate through Iceland, and they kept running these technical issues. And they said, well, that's because this hill over here it's literally named Elf Hall. That's the name of it. That's where the elves live. And so they said, well, you can't beat them, join them, and they rerouted the highway around Elf Hall. And then in the 1980s, as they often do around here, they decided they're doing some extensive interstate renovation. And when that crew got close to Elf Hall, their drill bit started breaking down again. Stuff started going missing again, and so they did it again. We're going to route around Elf Hall. We're going to leave it alone. And in 2014, and I halfway wonder if this isn't somewhat euphemistic, because there's a Nordic church, there's a pagan church in Iceland that literally worships Odin and so forth. But if you talk to anyone who's involved with the church, they say, listen, we don't literally believe that there's an 8-legged horse running through the heavens. It's more our relationship to ecology and history.
Right.
But in 2014, they were planning another road, and it was going to go right through this unspoiled volcanic region of Iceland. And there were protesters saying, no, that's where the elves live. You can't go through there. So it's a very real living tradition in some regions, and particularly Iceland, frankly.
Do you think that the transformation of the elves into sort of murderous, evil creatures in the forest to something that's more of a pranking, stealing tools kind of a creature was a way of sort of maintaining the myth of the elves without having to have all these dead bodies and people failing, all these major investigations? Because obviously if you got a bunch of people being killed by some creature, you're going to have, some sort of an authority service going in and trying to find it and root out and figure out what really happened. And whereas if you have missing tools, most of that's probably not going to even get reported to the authorities. It's just going to be rumor that's just going to float around from person to person, right? Mm-hmm. So it's more easy to keep the myth alive if you say, I lost a tool. Nobody's going to expect a major sheriff or police investigation into that. Whereas if somebody got killed, obviously there's going to be a huge investigation and somebody's going to be taken.
And I don't think there was the elves in the film. I haven't found any folklore where they're that violent. It's really much more. I mean, where the folklore does ring true is they're fine unless you piss them off, and then you got a problem. But the problem you have is more like I guess this is a big problem. They'll steal children. It's not so much they'll come through and murder everybody. Like your child goes missing, or your animals go missing,
Right.
or your milk or your food just goes missing. It just goes away. Which, I mean, and you can reconcile that with the physical universe. You know, someone's child is stolen. If you can't find a suitable subject, you say, well, perhaps maybe the elves did it.
Right.
It's not entirely impossible. What did you do to piss off that damn elf? And
old school victim blaming.
how did you piss off the elf?
So
And that's somewhat how we domesticate the elves as time goes forward.
take away the murder.
Yeah, take away the malevolence. Yeah. I don't think there really was that much murder going on, unless you count child stealing, which.
Or red caps, you know, but then they become more like trolls or goblins.
I haven't heard of red caps.
Yeah, talk about red caps.
The red caps were considered fae.
Okay.
But it was whether or not it was more on the elf or goblin side. But basically, I think they're mostly out of the UK. But they're called red caps because they liked consuming and killing humans, and they would dye their caps red from the blood of humans.
Yeah, the blood of the people they killed, they dipped their caps in.
Yeah.
That sounds almost more like a goblin.
Yeah.
I hear that sort of thing.
So, but so I personally I enjoyed what they tried to do with the mythology. I felt like they didn't go far enough, and I felt like it was too happy of an ending. But you being a folklore person, what was your reaction? Do you think they did enough to really make people appreciate the folklore, or did they rush it?
Well, it seems like they made up their own folklore, because I mean, I cannot find a tradition of elves that look like that. I mean, because the elves, when they're grown, yeah, they look like Groot. They are big and they are scary and they are vicious. And elves are a little more conniving like that. It's more of a cat model than a dog or a bear model. And that's what people do when they go into adapting folklore to fiction. I don't have a problem with that, but yeah, they're kind of going on their own. I mean, you could have called them anything, but I think they choose the word elves because it resonates with people and so forth. With elves, there's always seems to be, at least linguistically and folklorically, this little back and forth. They're your helpers. They're like the domovoi in the Russian tradition. They can be helpers. They can be counselors. But if you mess with them, they will mess with you back. And you don't want to do that. Maybe you're better off leaving them alone. And they really didn't get to that. I mean, I think they wanted a horror, but then they wanted this cute little ET / Mac and Me / whatever thing going on. And I don't think they really. It looks like one of those group projects where two people couldn't decide what they want to do. Say, well, let's just do them both. And it was kind of unsatisfying.
And I totally see where you're coming from, and I agree. But to me, they really probably took a lot of inspiration from Brian Froud, who was the primary lead designer for Labyrinth. But him and his wife have been saying they see fairies for years. And when you look at his art, his perception of what he says fairies are, they're much more integrated with nature. So like the link I sent, if you scroll down more in the images, they become more nature-y.
We'll put that link in the episode links when we post it.
But if you search Brian Froud, bad fairies, because he's got a book that's good fairies and bad fairies, and it flips actually in verses. His fairies are more integrated. They look like nature and branches and leaves. They camouflage in your garden, especially the bad fairies. And that's where I felt like they took a lot of inspiration from the creature effects and their existence in this.
Well, Stu, how did the elves get integrated in the whole Christmas tradition?
Well, that's a good question, because we were talking about these really very regional folklores of Iceland and Scandinavia and Britain. The elves get integrated into the Santa tradition through another brand of regional folklore. That region is New Jersey.
Ah!
Okay.
Wow.
There was a
Okay.
Plot
awesome.
twist. Didn't see that coming.
yeah,
no.
exactly. Yeah, and I just sent the group a link to a poem that appeared in Harper's Weekly, which was ostensibly out of New York, but this particular poem comes out of New Jersey, where it just goes through this. It was written in 1857, and that would be 35 years after Clement Moore's A Visit from St. Nicholas. There are no elves in The Visit from St. Nicholas. It's just Santa doing it all by himself. At one point, they call him an elf. To give him sort of this mystical aura, this mystical
the
relationship.
jolly old elf thing.
Yes, yeah, the jolly old elf, and he put nose to his finger to his nose in spite of himself, or chuckled himself in spite of himself. Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
And but in this 1857 poem, which has not survived in popular imagination nearly as well as Moore's has, that's where you have this idea that Santa has these elves that are working for him. But the idea is that if you ever were to find Santa's workshop, the elves would just be gone. They'd stop working and boom, that would be it. So yeah, the only person who can possibly believe in it is someone who's never seen it. Because if you ever see it, you can't believe it exists.
Huh.
Huh.
Yeah. So yeah, the wonders of Santa Claus, beyond the ocean, many a mile and many a year ago.
So you're saying it's Schrodinger elves? Sorry, I'm sorry. You're
Yes,
reading.
exactly. Schrodinger's elves. There lived a wonderful, queer old man in a wonderful house of snow, and every little boy and girl on Christmas Eve arrive. No doubt will be very glad to hear the old man is still alive. In his house upon the top of a hill, and almost out of sight, he keeps a great many elves at work, all working with all their might to make a million pretty things. Cake, sugar, plums, and toys to fill the stockings hung up, by the little girls and boys.
Not creepy at all.
It gets creepier, actually. There's a stanza in there that I really had trouble making it through, and until I realized it was about a toy. But yeah, there's something about an old woman being kept in a box, and I'm like, what the heck are they talking about? And I'm like, oh, okay, they're talking about like a Jack in the Box type of toy.
Okay.
It had me going there for a second. I was like, okay, this just took a dark turn that I'm really not comfortable with. But yeah,
for some reason, I don't know why, that reminds me of one of my favorite Christmas songs, "Night Santa Went Crazy" by Weird Al.
Weird Al.
I don't even know that one. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Really?
Yeah, I haven't heard of that either.
Oh, it's fantastic. I love it.
Gracious. I've heard his Christmas at Ground Zero, certainly,
right,
which is wonderful. Locally, have we talked about this before on the show? I'm not certain, because I'm actually coming up with some material on this that I'll let you know about as soon as it's done. But Willa Cather, the great Nebraska author whose statue is being placed in the Capitol Rotunda, now replacing William Jennings Bryan and J. Sterling Morton. Yeah, yes, yeah. Nebraska's if you don't know, either is replacing or has replaced these two old white guys with Willa Cather and Chief Standing Bear as our representatives in the Capitol Rotunda now. But no, she published a story as a young author called I believe it's called "The Strategy of the Werewolf Dog." Which essentially is about a werewolf with some kind of a grudge against Santa and the reindeer, who ends up murdering all but one of the reindeer at one point.
Oh my God.
And
that's awesome.
That part of it is really pretty dark. And
did he save Rudolph? That's all I want to know.
No, this predates Rudolph. Rudolph was not a thing yet. No, there one. I believe it's Blitzen. One of the reindeer, Donner or Blitzen, one of the two, survives and crawls back to Santa's abode. And this polar bear, who's like Santa's lead assistant, comes up with a scheme. And well, let's just say that if you're familiar with George Washington addressing his troops, saying, "I'm sorry, I need my spectacles to read my address because I've gone not just gray but blind in the service of my country," and the soldiers all break down crying, like, "Oh my goodness, how could we have ever been disloyal to our commander and our country?" Well, in the Willa Cather story, the same thing happens with the drunken seal.
A drunken seal.
Yes. And you know
Kind of
what?
metal.
I am not going to explain that any further. I'm just going to leave that right there.
Was she doing edibles when she wrote the story? That's all I want to know.
I wouldn't rule that out, certainly.
So are elves more in association than with Krampus? Does that have a longer, more like substantiated collaboration in folklore than they do with Santa Claus?
That's a good question. Because the elves that are working for Santa, they're obviously very benevolent. I mean, there's
Yes.
nothing ambiguous about that at all. The elves and Krampus, that's a good question. I thankfully just happen to be sitting at a keyboard, for which I will unashamedly
Research that.
Krampus elves. Oh my gosh, I'm not sure. There's really, I could be wrong. I likely am wrong, but I don't think that. I'm not sure if Krampus does Krampus really have any help. I think he's a solo act. He looks
Yeah,
like
I've never seen any images of Krampus with assistants or anything. He always seems to be mostly associated with Saint Nick. Saint Nick visits the good boys and girls on Christmas Eve. Krampus visits the bad ones and beats them with reeds, throws them in a bag, drags them to hell. Actually, I think he drowns them in a river first. But anyway.
Do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Because I think the elves with Krampus is probably a more modern, just movie effect, because you saw that in the actual American movie Krampus, where he had helpers that could be considered elves, and then in the foreign movie Rare Exports, which is a giggle. I enjoyed Rare Exports actually more. I felt like they balanced the comedy and the lightness with the dark and murdery on Christmas better than this TV series. So I highly recommend that. Santa is Krampus. They're the same thing basically in that, and he has elves that help him.
Yeah, I mean, there's some pictures of Krampus Nacht is a festival that's held in Germanic countries, right? And I think that's on like December 5th or 7th, somewhere around there every year. And you can get on YouTube and just do a search for Krampus Nacht, and you'll see all these festivals that happen in all these different cities, and these individuals that dress up as Krampus. I mean, these costumes are absolutely the stuff of nightmares. These masks and everything, and they've got, hairy outfits that they're dressed in, and they've got whips and torches and all kinds of horrible things. Yeah, there's some examples. And usually you'll see all these Krampus, and they'll be accompanied by an individual dressed as or costumed up as Saint Nick. But the thing that's kind of struck me is that Saint Nick almost looks in some of these more horrible than the Krampi himself. So
Krampi?
Because there's usually only one Saint Nick, but then there's 50 or so of these Krampus dudes, accompanying him.
German word with the Latin plural, I tell you.
And I know that the episode is about the show Elves and Elves, but now I just want to make the title for this episode Krampi.
Don't get fake news, Seth.
Elves, Krampi, and the various thingamabobbers.
Yeah.
Okay. So then just, in regards to this episode, final crazy question. Everyone, if you hit an elf in the woods with your car, are you going to try and stay and save the elf, or are you going to just keep driving because none of that?
Do I know it's an elf?
If it's the movie, you don't. You just
Fair
know it's
question.
something hurts.
It's just, let's just say it's a creature that looks cute.
You hit Baby Yoda on the road. What are you doing?
Why was Baby Yoda in the road?
We don't know.
To get to
Maybe
the other
driving
side.
from dark
You don't
unknown.
have.
Dark unknown.
Well, if it was me, I'm probably driving fast enough to the point where I know there's no point in stopping to check because I know I killed whatever it was that I did. That is my answer.
All right, Stu.
I think I'd try. Oh, sorry.
No,
I
go
think
ahead.
I'd try to go back and get it, because think of the action on the talk shows and stuff. You're the guy that saved
I like
Baby Yoda essentially.
Yeah, I would definitely go back to get it. The mistake I would not make, and I think that may be a theme of taboo violation fiction like this is I would try to avoid the information asymmetry. Because the first thing I'd see, okay, I find this unfamiliar creature in this unfamiliar, mysterious island that people have already been very creepy about. Yes, much like this. I'm not going to say, okay, I'm not going to keep this to myself. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to someone on the island who I trust, or figure out try and suss out who that would be, and say, okay, here's what I got. What do we do about this?
And look at
I'm not going to try and solve this out of ignorance. I'm going to, that's my ethos. It's like I try to get in, rather than try to oppose the community and try to bring my own values to it. I think you have to understand the community. So what I would do is I would, get this elf, make sure it's, medically stable, and then, go to the person I trust the most on this island and say, okay, here's who I found. What's the next step? What do we do with this? And I think you can avoid a lot of negative consequences that way.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot.
There's that picture I was talking about with the Saint Nick, and look at how creepy that guy's face looks.
Yeah, but look at the Saint Nick in the black. That guy's jacked.
He is. He works out a lot. Well, all right.
Linda, what would you do? Hit an elf in the woods.
If you hit an elf in the woods, does anybody hear it? I think I'd be like Chris. I'd keep going.
Keep going.
I'm not getting out of the car.
That is a hard question. If I hit Baby Yoda in the woods, I think I'd have to say kind of like Stu. I definitely wouldn't take it and then hide it. I'd try and find a vet in the area and be like, hey, there's this weird thing. Help?
Yeah, right.
And if they were like, oh, I don't know what that is, then I found a new creature and then I get to name it. And if they're like, holy shit, put that back behind the electric fence, where'd you get this? I'd be like, okay, because it's kind of like, if you hit a bear cub, do you pick up the bear?
That's a good question. I think if it's a small enough cub, especially if you've got a pickup, I think you almost do, but then you do what you said. You either take it to either a vet or to you call the park ranger.
But you make damn sure that the mama bear isn't around.
Right.
You've got a point there. Maybe you don't actually pick up the bear. Maybe from a respectful distance, you call the park ranger and say, "Hey, I just hit a bear out here.
Yeah.
You want to send somebody out here to look out after it medically, or what do you want to do?" And
like that little girl, it's like nobody ever took her to a zoo and was like, hey, you see how those tiger cubs are really cute? Yeah, you still don't pet them.
Well, you do, but there was a whole mini series on that last year, Steph. In fact, you may have heard about it.
Perfect point. You think some stuff would be natural, but when I was a teacher at the SMU field school in New Mexico, Taos, New Mexico, we're in the middle of Carson National Forest. Some of the college kids, who are all pretty much city folk, told the security person the next day, like, oh, we were out walking in the woods last night and we saw this cute bear cub and we almost picked it up. It was awesome, but we didn't, it was in a hard to reach place. And the security person was like, you do realize you would be dead, right? Like, where there's a bear cub, there's a mom, and they're gonna eat your face. Like, like, because the security guard ran into me and told me this later, and she was like, how do you not know? You
Right.
see, don't touch.
Shiny things, cute things. Yes.
This is what we would
Deadly
call
thing.
natural selection, though.
Right.
Sometimes the bears naturally select to eat certain people.
And on that note, make sure you feed Santa this Christmas, kids, but don't feed the bears or the trolls.
For the elves.
Or the
Or
elves.
the elves.
Santa will appreciate your edibles.
People, if you don't know what it is, maybe don't make it a pet.
Yeah, that's fair. Yep. That's the moral of the story.
Sage advice, Seth. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Galactic Driftwood Podcast. As always, you can watch this episode and find out all of our other episodes on galacticdriftwood.space. You can also check out our partner podcasters on synergynation.net. That's SYN nation.net. And on that note, we'll bid you adieu. Hope you all have a happy Christmas, and we will talk to you again next week, right before New Year's, where we'll talk about some of the new sci-fi stuff that's about to come out on asteroids and fun things like that. So take care, y'all. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Later.
Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Galactic Driftwood Podcast. For more information and past episodes, please visit our website at galacticdriftwood.space or subscribe to us on YouTube. And now, please deactivate your cranial downlinks, collect your towels, and be sure to watch your step as you exit our gravity well.